Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Yudchet. This is the daf for Yom Kippur. Mar Chatima Tova to everyone. Today's daf is sponsored by David and Gita Neufeld in loving memory of Marvin Stoker Zichrono Lebracha, an avid daf learner and our honorary Zaidi. He and Talchata and his cherished Fran fulfilled their lifelong dream when they made Aliyah. How proud he would be of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, biological and adopted, who have followed in his footsteps. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Okay, today we're going to be learning, interestingly, about the Bigdei Kehuna, very appropriate topic for the Avodat Yom Kippuri of the Kohen Gadol, which we're not going to talk about so much directly, but yes, it is all about the clothes, about the Kohanim, and also the Kohen Gadol. So we're going to start with the end of yesterday's daf, where we saw there was a braita. How do we know that? We had two different sources about how we know that any work that's done without the Kohanim wearing their appropriate clothing is disqualified. So we have the first source was this will be kehuna lechukat olam. Kehuna meaning while they're working in their job, it has to be they're not considered kohanim without their clothes. Okay, it's the clothes that are important. And then we saw a different source which started with the question, how do we know? Okay, starting 4 lines from the bottom, and then the Gemara asked basically, how do we learn from there? Don't we learn from this source? How do you know that if you go drunk into the temple and you do the avoda, the kohen, the work you did is totally disqualified? Talmud lomer yain v'shechar al tesht. Okay, don't drink, to distinguish between what's kodesh and chol. If you drink, it will be chol, which means, again, from chilul, of being disqualified. How do you know also it's the same thing for someone who didn't wear the kohen's clothes? Kohen did the work without the clothes, which is exactly what we're looking for, or didn't wash his hands and face, his hands and his feet. Minayin Talmud lomar chukah l'gzera shava. Okay, it says the word chukah. It says chok olam also it says chukah we saw by the Bigdei Kehuna. It says chok olam by the washing the hands and feet, and it also says chukah by the shtuyei yayin pasuk. So because we learn from all that, what's true for shtuyei yayin, just like shtuyei yayin, the work is desecrated, which we learn from Lavdil, ben kodesh ben chol, also for the one who's not wearing the clothes and the one who didn't wash his hands and feet. So now we have to figure out why we have 2 psukim, to which the Gemara says, if we had learned from there, specifically by the second pasuk, okay, the yain u'shechau. Now there, you have to read the whole pasuk, okay? It says, yain v'shechar al tesh, shatau b'necha itach, okay, you and your sons with you, don't drink, b'va'achem al ol mo'ed, when you come to ol mo'ed, v'lo tamutu, and you won't die. Now from here, we're going to see that the Gemara is going to understand this isn't only talking about someone who's drunk, it's also talking about someone who doesn't belong there and shouldn't be, like a zar, a non-kohen. It's usually the disqualified people for a voter, either kohanim or a drunk, or the non-kohen. So now we're going to connect that pasuk to there, because those are the people who get death by the hands of God for being in the temple and doing something wrong. So the Gemara says, if you would have had it from there, it would only be work that a non-kohen or a drunk kohen would actually get the death penalty for, right? And again, death by the hands of God. But in what cases are you obligated the death penalty? And maybe those are the only avodot that if you would do them, okay, just like the pasuk there is saying, if you do them when you're drunk, or if you're not a kohen and you do them, you will be, right, you will get death by the hands of God. Also, that's the kind of, if you're doing work during that time, drunk or non-kohen, or if we're going to learn from there to the mechusar begadim and lo rechut yadayim v'raglayim, you weren't wearing the clothes, you didn't wash your hands and feet, only during those avodot will your avodah be disqualified. That's what we would have thought. Now, which avodot are them? So in the middle of Rashi, Imehatam, he quotes another Gemara which says, El arba avodot, 4 avodot, but they're not the usual 4. Zrika v'haktara v'nisuch hamayim v'ayayin. It's the sprinkling of the blood, the burning of the parts on the altar, which could either be the parts of the animal or the mincha offering, the komets. V'nisuch hamayim, pouring the water libations, and pouring the wine libations. Okay, and that is learned out from Yoma Daf Kaf Daled, apropos Yom Kippur. Now, because where they learn it from, Me'avaditem avodat matana. V'azara karev yumat. So it has to be things that are placed on the altar, like the final step, not the halakha, bringing the blood, or Kabbalah, accepting the blood. No, no, no. It's the final step, like spilling it on the altar, burning it on the altar. Those are all the final steps of the process. So it's those four. So they said you would have thought that, right? And because those are the only things that a zar is actually going to get the death penalty for, also a shtuyayin, one who's drunk. So you might have thought that those are the only avodot that actually will be disqualified if someone does them when they're drunk, and learning from there too, also if someone does them when they're not wearing the clothes. So, right, avodah de ein zar chayav aleh mita'im alo. Maybe not. Maybe it's not disqualified. Any of the other avodot, like let's say kabbalat hadam, accepting the blood. If the kohen did it without the clothes, maybe it wouldn't be disqualified, because again, the context of that pasuk is you get death by the hands of God. So it would only be in cases where you get death in the hands of God that the lav ben hakodesh ben hachol would be relevant. To which the Gemara says, right, kamash malan, that's why it needed the other pasuk. So now they say, okay, well then we understand we needed this other pasuk. Now the other pasuk is in the context only of the mechusar begadim. So that first drashah of when your kiuna is on you, right, when you're wearing the begadim, then you're a kohen. When you're not really considered a kohen. That applies across the board. That only helped us though to find the source for mechusar begadim. What about the fact that a shtuye yayin who is drunk and does any other avoda, so while he might not get the death penalty, it will be desecrated, right? The work won't be valid. How do we know that? That's what we want to know, because if it was all learned out from the mechusar begadim pasuk, we have no way to learn it to the shtuye yayin pasuk. Eshkacha mechusar begadim shtuye yayin minalan. So where do we get someone who's drunk and accepts the blood while they're drunk? Well, also the action will be disqualified. They say, very simple. Turn the Gzera Shava the other way and learn it from mechusar begadim to shtuye yayin. So Gemara is not going to like, because first of all, v'hatana ulav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol. Didn't we say the whole source for shtuye yayin is not from the mechusar begadim, but the source that it's desecrated is actually from lav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol. So they say, and then it doesn't teach you, because again, the context of all that pasuk is specifically when they're going to get the death penalty. And then it wouldn't apply to all the other avodot. They say, oh, that drasha started out with lav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol, but after that, the Tana found Gzera Shava and then rejected the lav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol, and then learned the whole thing from Gzera Shava. And now the problem is, what are we doing here? We're saying that the Gzera Shava is coming to teach you from a chusar begadim to the one who's drunk. Now, the problem is that that's not what it said, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. The order of that was not, oh, we're going to learn from the way the drasha is going right now. I just cut myself mid-sentence, but you'll see why. The way the Gemara is going now, just to summarize, the first source about the bigdei kuna gdola, right? When it talks, the bigdei kohen, the kohen's clothing that they wear. From there, we said it says kuna olam. From there, you learn that, and then that applies across the board. That anytime kohen is doing any of the avodot without clothes on, the work will be disqualified. From there, we have Gzera Shava. Okay. From there, chukah, it says there, and it says chukah and shtuye yayin. From there, you learn also shtuye yayin, even though you won't get the death penalty, but the work will be disqualified. And you don't learn it all from lav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol. The problem is completely, besides that we've gotten rid of the pasuk lav dil ben hakodesh ben hachol. Okay, but let's assume, okay, they found the Gzera Shava after, which was the second part of the braita. But what about the fact that the Gzera Shava says, right, michusar begadim v'shlo rachutz yadayim v'raglayim minayin. The whole order of the Gzera Shava, the chukah, we're learning from shtuye yayin to the one who didn't wear the clothes or didn't wash their hands and feet. Not the reverse, from the one who's not wearing the clothes to the one who's drunk. So that really doesn't work. Okay, so therefore they say, Ella hachi. So let's read it like this. We're going to reread the braita. Minayin shalo nechleku ben bechusar begadim l'shtuye yayin v'shalo b'chutz yadayim v'raglayim. Read it as, how do we know there's no distinction between all of those? In other words, learn it first about the clothes, and then from there, there's no distinction to any of these other things, because Talmud lomar chukah l'gzera shava. Okay, so then we basically shift the kal vachomer in the gzera shava, the gzera shava in the opposite direction, and it's going from mechusar begadim to the other two, to the shtuyei yayin, to the drunk, and to the rechutz yadayim v'raglayim. Okay, but now we go back and say ela lavdil lamali. So what's that pasuk coming for then? Lavdil ben hakodesh ben hachol. If not for this, they say lechide Rav. Okay, what was Rav? He takes it to a completely different place. The context of the pasuk is the kohen, but we're going to learn from the kohen to something completely different, to a rabbi. Rav lo mokim amora alei miyom tova lechavre. Rav wouldn't put an amora in charge of him from on a holiday, from one holiday to the next day, mishum shechrut, because he was drunk. He would drink wine on the holiday. He wouldn't want to teach to be horeh. Okay, going back to horeyot, teaching a ruling. He wouldn't want to issue rulings then because, right, to give a drashot, because he said, Lavdil ben a kodesh u ben a chol. Okay, in other words, once they're drunk, right, don't come yayin to be mavdil ben kodesh to chol. And he said that teaches you something additional. So you don't really need those words in the pasuk. It's coming to teach you shouldn't teach when you're drunk. Okay, and that he was very careful not to do that. Okay, now, so we resolved. Okay, and again, reread. We had to reread that second braita. Really, the whole halakha is learned from the first. But the second one is coming to say we learn from there to shtuyei yayin, even though the shtuyei yayin pasuk is talking about the death, right? We get death by the hands of God, and it only really applies in 4 avodot. But the fact that it will be desecrated and it won't be valid at all is learned out from gzera shava, and also richutz yadayim v'raglayim, also from the same gzera shava of hukah. Now they say, okay, but by the way, there's more psukim. Akatim hacha nafka mehatam nafka, but really it could be learned from somewhere else. Where is that? V'natnu b'nei Aaron kohen bikihuno. Okay, let's read the whole pasuk. V'natnu b'nei Aaron kohen esh ala mizbeach. So b'nei Aaron hakohen. Now, everyone knows Aaron is a kohen. Why do you need to tell us hakohen? Bikihuno, when he's in his job as kohen. Limed al kohen gadol. We got to the kohen gadol. Shelavash bi, right, our hero of the day, Yom Kippur. Shelavash bi day kohen idiot. Now we're not talking about him only on Yom Kippur, but any day of the year. If he wore the regular kohen clothing, va'avad, and he worked, avodato psula. So what do you see here? Again, we have a disqualification. Now it's a different one, but it's a disqualification. If the kohen gadol wears regular kohen clothing and does the work will be disqualified. So here you have the same kind of idea. So why do you need that pasuk also? Now remember the first pasuk we said, right, covers kind of everything, but maybe only things where, now we already remember the shtuyei yayin pasuk we thought was only those 4 avodot, the zrika, haktara, nisuch hamayim, and hayayin. But now we say, wait, we already had the other pasuk about the kohen's clothing, and it said there, kuhuna, to teach you, they have to be kohanim wearing their proper clothing. And from there, we say that maybe only those are things that are ma'akev kapara, that are critical, like, let's add to the list, besides those 4, we now add our Kabbalah and halakha, accepting the blood, walking the blood, right? Like some of the real important, significant ones that are in addition to those other 4 that we saw that are finishing the job, but even the ones earlier that are critical elements. So, but maybe not things that are makev kapara. Now, what's our pasuk about the kohen gadol coming to tell you? Well, what does it say there? Kohen gadol, it says there, natnu b'nei Aaron kohen. They brought the fire to the altar. That's not a critical element. I mean, it is important. It needs to be there, but they don't need to bring it. First of all, there's always a fire there. Okay, so they don't need to bring it. So they do, but it's not a critical element. So because it's not a critical element, and yet it says kohen, it means you have to wear the right clothes, even for non-critical activities in the temple. Otherwise, you disqualify what you're doing. Va'akati mehacha nafka mehatam nafka. Again, still, really, we're going to learn it from there. We have another pasuk. We're up to 4th, right? Even though one we completely rejected and said it's really going the other direction to teach about something else. But we still have these 3. So what about this other one? So again, the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, again, unnecessary word, set up the parts of the animal, the cuts. So again, hakohanim b'kiunan. Mikan, what did they learn this time? L'kohen idiot shalavash b'dei kohen gadol. What if the reverse? The kohen, regular kohen, wears the kohen gadol's clothes. And avadato psula. Again, disqualified, okay? Even if you go up, right? That also is not good. So why do you need that pasuk also? Well, the Gemara is going to say very simply, if you didn't have that pasuk, you would have thought maybe it's just missing clothes, either a regular kohen not wearing the kohen gadol clothes, or the wearing the kohen clothes, or the kohen gadol wearing the kohen idiot clothes, kind of wearing something less. Maybe wearing something more would be okay. Comes that pasuk to teach you no. Even if they wear the higher level clothes, work is disqualified. Okay, that was the first part. Now we're going to move, continuing on along the clothing, and the importance of the clothing and being proper and right. So now we're going to say Tana Rabbanit. The braita says, Hayu merushalim. What if they were too long and dragging on the floor? Or misulakin, or too short? They had to be really up against the floor, just above the floor. What if they were too short or too long? Mishuchakim, or they were worn out. This reminds me of Berenstein Bear's book, right? Too big, too small, too hot, too this, too tall, right? Too short, too tall. Okay, what if it's right, not the right length, or worn out? Ve'avad, and the kohen does the work with these clothes that are mismatched, right? Or not the proper size, or worn out. Kshera avodato kshera. Okay, it's fine. According to the braita, it's fine. We're going to see some contradictions to this, but right now the braita says it's fine. Lavash shnei mechnasayim, shnei avnitim. What if you had two, you have one of the priestly garments, but you wore two of them, one on top of the other? Okay? Chaser echad, yater echad, or you were missing one. Or you had something in addition to the clothing on. You were wearing some other garment in addition to the regular kohen clothing, but a regular garment. Oh, so you're wearing the priestly garments, but you wore something in addition. Bigad chol, like a regular garment. Oh, shaita ritiya amakat b'saro tacha bigdo. Or you had a bandage, which was providing a chatzitza. It was a separation between the clothing and the body. The clothing has to be on the body. You can't have a separation. O shayumatush tashim, turning out on the bet where they were dirty. Homakuraim, or torn. Va'avad avadato psula. Okay, all of the second category of stuff, which actually we're not going to deal with, but all of those actually disqualify the garment. Okay, two, some whole one, dirty, torn, that already disqualification. But going back to the beginning, the first three we saw were good. Now, I'm a Rav Yehuda, I'm Rav Shmuel. Now we have an Amora. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Merushalim kshirim, mesulakim psuli. Okay, Merushalim kshirim, they're too long, they're kshirim, that matches the braita. But mesulakim, if they're too short, they're psulim. Now our Mishnah, the braita said they're kshirim. V'hatanya mesulakim kshirim, so doesn't the braita say that? Amarami barhama lo kasha. Kan shesilkan yedei avnit, kan delitnu meikar klal. One was that he took it, that he picked it up using the belt, and they got too short. In other words, they were the perfect length. But you all know when you put a belt on, what happens? It lifts it up, and now they were too short. So that is going to be okay. But the other one, it was too short to begin with. So this is interesting. It's actually not too short, even though it looks too short right now. If it looks too short right now, then it's going to be a problem. Then it's if it looks too short right now, but it really is long enough, that's not to disqualify your work. But what the avoda in the temple. But if it's too short to begin with, that's a problem. So Shmuel was talking about too short to begin with, and the braita was talking about it was the right length. It just was lifted up, and it's too short right now because of the belt. Rav Amal echad zev yechad zev psuli. Now we get to another problem. Rav says both are psuli, also too long, also too short. So Rav Huna ikle l'Argiza. He came to Argiza. Ramile bar ushbis chaychu. So the person in the inn there said, "Mi amar Shmuel hachi." Did Shmuel? Mi amar Shmuel merushalim ksherim mesulakim psulim v'hatanya mesulakim ksherim. Said, how could Shmuel have said? They ask Rav Huna this question, right? When Rav Huna gets to this place, they say, "I don't get it." Shmuel said merushalim ksherim mesulakim psulim, and the braita says mesulakim ksherim. He says, why are you asking me about that? Forget about that one. Rami Barham already answered that. But Rav Kasha, you should be asking me about Rav. Rav is much more difficult because Rav completely contradicts, right? The just said both are kshirim, and Rav said they're both psulim. Fa'avnei megas agis. Maybe you want to say at least the merushalim. What's the ones that are too long? They're misulakim al yedei avneit. And as when it says merushalim, that merushalim are ksherim, maybe in the braita, merushalim ksherim doesn't really mean too long dragging on the floor. Maybe it means they're long, but they were lifted up by a belt. And if they were long and lifted up by a belt, then they're okay because right now they're not too short. Then right now they're not too long. And then in Rav, when Rav said merushalim are problematic, he means they're dragging on the floor. And the braita that says merushalim are when you pick them up with the belt, and because of that they're not dragging on the floor, and that's what makes them okay. And the avnei megas agis, and the avnei, right, makes them shorter, and that would work. But elam mesulakim kasha. But how are you going to explain mesulakim then? You have no way to explain it. So Amar Rabbi Zera, Rav Hadatane. Rav really read this as one thing. In other words, Rav read the braita like this. The braita said, Merushalim, right, let's go back. Merushalim, hayu Merushalim, Misulakim, Mishuchakim, Va'avav Vadatok Shir. We thought that was three different things. Merushalim, too long, Misulakim, too short, and Mishuchakim, worn out. He reads Merushalim, Misulakim is one case. How does he read it? Merushalim shesilkan al yedei avneit ksherim. Says if they're too long and they're lifted up by a belt, then they're kosher, they're good. But if they're too short, there is no case of too short in the braita. If they're too short, they're disqualified, and if they're too long and they're dragging on the floor, they're also disqualified. And that's how he resolves the braita, because he turns the braita into one case, and it's an in between the two cases. It's too long but made shorter, the right length by the belt, and that works. So that's how he resolves the contradiction between Rav and the braita. Amar Rabbi Yomi Amidifti, Merushalim shelo silkan tenahi. Rabbi Yomi Amidifti says if they're too long dragging on the floor and you didn't pick them up with the belt, there's a machloket tanaim about this. How do we know? Tanya. Now, what's the basis of the machloket tanaim? Well, actually starts off in a different topic altogether, which is tzitzit. Tzitzit, we all know, if you have a four-corner garment, you have to put tzitzit on. What if it's three corners? What if it's five corners? So that's what the braita is going to deal with. Titania, al arba kamfok sutcha. Right, that's the pasuk. You have to put it on the four corners of your garment. Arba velo shalosh. Right, that means four, but not if you have three. Only when you get up to four. Oh, we know ella arba velo chamesh, but maybe it's four and not five. And then three, you would still have to. Right, it means anything under four. Keshu omer asher techaseba. Well, it says right, al arba kamfok sutecha. Asher techaseba. Now, if it's the knafot, the corners of your ksut, your garment, that's ksut means literally covering you, then why do you have to say which is covering you? Obviously, your garment, which is called ksut, is covering you. So why do you add those words? That must come to include an additional case. Now, the obvious is, why include the five garments? So that means if you have five corners on your garment, you have to put tzitzit on. If you have three, you don't. Anything above four and above, you have to. So hamani became arba. So why does it say four then, right? Arba velo shalosh, four, not three. So now the obvious question is why we exclude three and include five? Why did we do the reverse? Why do you say to include five and not three? Because a five-corner garment, right? This is always a classic thing, also has four corners. A three-corner garment doesn't have four. So since the five also has four, you can call the five like a four because five includes four. But I can't say three because three doesn't have four. That's why. Okay, that's one braita. So that braita basically says five is really like four with an additional. This braita says no, four means four, not three, not five. Now, what do we assume is the root of this machloket, which in a minute we're going to reject, but right now we go back to what Yomi Amidifti wanted to say. This is the same machloket about merushalim shelo silkan, the ones that are dragging on the floor that you didn't lift up. Why? Let's think about it. Well, he says, Demar savar yeter kamandi itedami, the latter braita, which said four and not three and four and not five, says anything extra is as if it's in existence. In other words, we don't just ignore it and say five is really like four. No. Five is five. It's got an extra one. An extra is not good. Okay? And therefore, same thing with merushalim. It's got extra material. That's not good. Disqualified. Umar Savar, the one who says 5 is actually 4 with just a little extra, and that's okay, will say, Mar Savar invalidate dami. It's as if it's not there. In other words, 5 is like 4, includes 4 in it. We don't care that there's extra. Okay, they're too long. At least they're the right length. It's just they've got too much extra, but that doesn't bother us. So that's what he suggests. But now the Gemara rejects this and says, no, that's not true. Really, everyone thinks it's as if it's in existence, okay? We don't just ignore it. And shanehacha. So in the tzitzit case, we'll say that all the people here that are arguing about Merushalim, there they all agree. 4 and not 3, 4 and not 5. But here it's different. To Rabbi Rahmana asher techaseba. In other words, sorry, I said it wrong. Kulei alma kamandi ite dami in our case. Merushalim is extra, no good. But in the tzitzit case, there's a special drashot that will say, but 5 is okay. Why? Because we saw the Rabbi Rahmana asher techaseba, because there's an extra pasuk that includes an extra few words that includes an additional case. Anything that's covering you, even if it's got more. And that's why 5 is included, but for a totally different reason. Not because of Merushalim, in which case we can't say the machloket is Merushalim, Ksherim, or Psulim, a debate between Tanaim. V'idach, so now the other opinion, this is just a back and forth, a ping pong about these two opinions, 5, 4, and not 3 only, or 4 and not 5 also. Idach, hayashir techaseba, if you don't include 5, because you say it's 4 and not 3 and 4 and not 5, mayadile, what does he do with the words asher techaseba? Tanya needs it for a different drasha. Uri'item oto. Okay, now we're going to have a whole braita, and you'll see the words asher techaseba at the end. Uri'item oto. You're supposed to see the tzitzit. What does that teach you? Another famous halakha about tzitzit. Prat sut laila. You don't have to put it on your pajamas. Okay, something you wear at night because it's only when you see them. Oh, eno ela prat sut suma. Maybe it means uri'item oto, that if you're blind and you can't see, then you don't have to. And then you don't have to wear tzitzit. Put tzitzit on your garment because you can't see them anyway. Well, because asher techaseba reiksut suma more. No, because asher techaseba comes to include even someone who can't see their tzitzit because they're blind. So the blind person, yes, but the night garment, no. So again, the braita is going to ask, Hamani makayim uri'item oto. So what do I do with uri'item oto? Prat sut laila, right? So again, that's just finishing up the drasha. Uri'item oto comes to exclude pajamas, and asher techaseba comes to include the blind person. So now, ma re'ita lirabok sut suma ulotzik sut laila. Why that one in and that one out? Rabbanit sut suma sheyeshna b'riyah yitzalachirim, because other people can see the garment of the blind person. Umutzianik sut laila she'ena b'riyah yitzalachirim, but the pajamas nobody sees. And remember, in those days there were no lights at night; it was dark. People don't see. So because of that, nobody sees it, and therefore, right, it's hard for us to imagine. Of course, we always see pajamas, but in those days, no, and that's why that's excluded. V'idach, so now where's the other person going to learn one? If asher techaseba is already used for the 5, to include the 5, where you're going to include the case of the blind persons, that they have to put tzitzit on. Nafkaleme asher. There's asher and there's techaseba. So the extra word asher can teach one, and techaseba can teach the other. V'idach, what about the other one? You can learn 2 separate things. So why do they learn it all from one? Well, asher lo darish. They don't darish in the word asher, and that's it. Okay, Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to move on to another braita about the big day Kuna Gdola. So that was all just an attempt to say maybe there's a machloket tanaim here, and then they showed this isn't the same machloket tanaim. Okay, Tanu Rabbanit. Bad, okay, it says mechnasei bad. Okay, that's the material. But they're going to darshan a whole bunch of things about this bad. Okay, 5 drashot here. Bad shusha boots, okay, which is linen. Bad shiu chadashim, they'll be new. Bad shiu shizulim, they'll be twisted. Bad shiu chutin kaful shisha, there should be 6 ply. The string should be made of 6 strands. That, by the way, is a gematria. Bet dalet is 6 in gematria, 2 and 4. Bad shelo yabashel chol. Okay, that you can't wear. This is what we saw before. You can't wear other clothing with it, regular clothing. You can only wear the priestly garments, not a bag of non-priestly garment. Okay, that's because livad, bad livad only. Okay, some of these drashot you can connect with the word. Some of them are a little more difficult. Im shelo yabashel chol imahem. Don't wear chol with them. Amalei abai leRav Yosef. Bishlemashu shel boots hakamash v'lam boots im midyachrin elo. We get it has to be shel boots. They learn that from bad, and that it must be. It can't be made from anything else. Ela bad shu chadashim. Chadashim in shchakin lo. Wait. If they have to be new and not worn out, but wait, hatanya v'shuchakim kshirim. Going back to that braita, it said if they're worn out, they're kasher. So in other words, if we take all these drashot and we assume they're all the same, if bad means boots and we know they can only be made out of boots, if not, you're disqualified. But the disqualification of chadashim, it has to be chadashim, isn't true. It's not disqualified if it's not chadashim. So Amalei, Belitamech, wait, you're questioning that one? I could throw another one back at you. It's the same kind of question. Bad, shiuchutan kaful shisha. Bad, chad chad lechude mashma. When you say bad and you get to this 6, but on the other hand, you could say bad means livad, each one separate. Each one is separate and not 6 together. So in other words, all of these don't sound like they're so critical. Elahachi kamar. The way we should read it is like this. Begadim shenemar bahem bad srichin shiyu shel boots. That has to be, okay? They said, the Torah says they have to be bad. That means they have to be made from linen. Chadashim shizurin she'ech hutan kaful shisha yesh mehem lemitzvah yesh mehem la'akev, okay? But, okay, or maybe you should read like this. Bad shrichim shusha boots chadashim shizurim she'ech hutan kaful shisha. Sorry, the whole list of those 4, even though they don't quote the last one, the 5, about not wearing chol. But you would think, right, some of them, in other words, there's this slew of drashot that we put together. But some of them, l'mitzvah, yesh me'en la'akev, some of them are just a good thing to do. Like, better to have new, it looks nicer, okay? Like we call hidor mitzvah, which we'll see in a minute. But not all of them are ma'akev. Some of them are critical, like the boots, okay? And then these aren't all in the same category, even though they're kind of listed that way. Tahai bad kitana, in other words, now, okay, so that's la'akev. And really, Rashi says the only one that's ma'akev here is the boots. Now the Gemara wants to know, mimai daha bad kitanu. How do you know that bad is linen? Amar Rav Yosef, beRabbi Chanina, davar ha'olem nakarka bad bebad. Bad bebad means it comes up as one stalk with one, it's like one stalk coming out, not 2 stalks growing from the same seed. Amra. What about wool? Wool also comes out one out of each follicle of the animal, a hair follicle. But Amra mipatzel. Amra, the wool splits open, and the linen doesn't. Kitananami mipatzel. What do you mean? Also flats. When you beat it, it splits also. Well, that's al yedei likuta mifatzel. That's because you hit it, but not naturally, whereas the wool splits naturally, and that's why bad bebad in the end is the linen and not the wool. Remember, in those days, it was basically either linen or wool. So now that was one explanation for how we know bad is linen, because bad bebad. Ravina Amar Mehacha, he brings a different pasuk, a pasuk from Yechezkel in chapter 44, where it talks about the kohanim. Peirei pishin yu al rosham, umechnissei pishim yu al monehem. There you have it. The pants they wear are made from linen. Lo yachdaru bayaza. Okay, we're going to see in a minute what the bayaza is. But before we get there, Amalei Rav Ashi, the Ravina, Vaha, Ada Ata Yechezkel Minalam. But wait, it's very nice you brought a source from Yechezkel, but what about all those generations before? How did they learn that bad was linen? To which they asked back, V'litamech, Had Amar Rav Chisda, Davar Zeh Mitorat Moshe Rabbeinu lo lamadnu, Midivrei Yechezkel ben Buzi lamadnu. I'm going to tell you the following thing. This is a different source. We didn't learn this from Moshe. We learned it from Yechezkel. What is it? Kol ben nechar arel lev, arel basar lo yavo mikdashi. If you have a person who doesn't have a brit milah, they can't go into the mikdash, right? Anyone who's not Jewish, who's an arel, can't come who's not circumcised, cannot come into the temple. Ad sheba Yechezkel minala. Now it says that in Yechezkel. So where they know it from before Yechezkel? Ela gemara gemira leva ati Yechezkel va'asmechei akra. It's just a tradition. They knew it was a tradition passed down to Moshe from Sinai. It just Yechezkel put it in a pasuk. Okay. It's not that it didn't exist until the time of Yechezkel. Hachanami gemara gemira le will say the exact same thing here. Okay, and that's why even though it appears only in Yechezkel, we could claim, okay, again, we had 2 sources. One is the bad bebad, the other is Yechezkel, and then we could claim, well, really it was a tradition, just Yechezkel put it in words. Okay, put it down. Last thing for today, my lo yachgaru bayaza, amar Abaye, lo yachgaru bimkom shemizi'im. Don't put the belt on in a place where people sweat. Kedetanya, as it says in a braita, kashem chogrim, en chogrim lo lamata mimonehem, lo lamata me'atzalihem. Not right, not under your loins and not above, like by your armpits. Ela keneged atzilei yedehem, but near like your waist, basically near your elbows. Okay, we'll stop here for now. We'll just do a quick review. We started with all the sources for how do we know that if you don't wear the priestly garments, the avoda is disqualified. We started with comparing two. In the end, we kind of ended up rejecting one and saying it's really teaching the reverse. It's actually there to teach about this from the our case to the Shriya Yain. But then we brought two other sources, and then each one was coming to talk about a unique difference of wearing clothes, either the Kohen Gadol wearing the Kohen regular clothes or the regular Kohen wearing the Kohen Gadol's clothes. And then from each one, we learned a bit of a different thing about it includes more avodot, not just the four, not just right, also ones right, not just critical ones, but also ones that are not as critical. That was from the Aish. And then from the other one, we learned even wearing too many is also an issue. And then we got to this contradiction between the braita and Shmuel, and then the braita and Rav, and we resolved all the contradictions about which ones are too long, too short. We tried to say maybe it's machlokas tanaim if they're too long. Do we look at extras if it's not really there? Learning from the cited, and the end we said it's not a fair comparison. That's got its own unique halachot. And then we had these drashot about what bad is, and then we distinguished between them. Some are very critical, but most of them are not really so critical, even though they were kind of listed all together. And from there we got to how do we know that bad is pishtan, two different sources, and then we just finished up with that pasuk from Yechezkel about lo yachgaru bayaza. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a gemar chatima tova.